What did she know about you? Did she know you were married first?
She did once I showed her the pictures on the phone. Yeah, I'm like, the home screen picture. So,
So was your wife in that picture, or was it just your phone?
it was just my girls right there, but my wife was the lock screen.
Oh,
So she knew I was married with my kids.
Yeah.
are you aware that she said she didn't know you were married?
Yeah,
What did you think about that?
Figured it was like just trying to save face, trying to, I was just trying to. And some of my sister said it was like just trying to keep things together.
Yeah.
Just trying. She phrased it a different way, but it's just kind of like just like ground control, just trying to control everything that's going on around her. Because I'm sure she got bombarded by all kinds of different sides from the media and everything. So
Do you wish you could talk to her?
maybe once, just to
Get some closure?
say like, hey, just once.
Yeah.
Say like, I'm sorry this all happened. I'm sorry. I'm not sure like what happened like afterwards, like what you went through, like if you had like counseling, if you're like, different state, if you had to leave everything behind. I just wanted to let you know I'm sorry and that something I never saw in my life happening or happening to somebody else could do.
Would you be alright if we told her that?
That's fine.
Do you want us to? Do you want us not to?
And if she would want to even talk to you guys, I mean, I'm not sure if she'll contact me. I'm sure she'd answer your phone call more than the attorney phone call that she didn't want to go answer. Yeah.
Oh, so your attorney tried to call her and she wouldn't answer?
Yeah, because I remember her phone number, but after that they figured out, I guess, where she lived. And they left a business card there. And she just pretty much after like the fifth attempt, she said stop. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure she's getting bombarded like everyone else, so.
Hopefully it's calmed down since, but I'm sure like I just hope she can I'm not there's like normalcy for her, not since she's on the outside, but I'm hoping it can get that way at some point. I'm not sure if she had to leave Colorado or not, but I'm sure that would have been hard if she did.
Mm-hmm.
I know that Darker was her dream job, so that's one thing I always asked my attorneys was did she have to leave? Like, did she have to do anything at work? Because that was one thing. So she always told me that was her dream job. So.
The prison phone crackles, carrying the sound of a man who once lived in a quiet Colorado suburb. His voice, low and strangely soft, reaches across the static. I just wish I could talk to her, just once. It isn't his wife he longs for. Not the mother of his children. No, Chris Watts is speaking about the woman who stood at the center of his double life, the woman he defended even as the walls of truth closed in. In that call, Chris excused her lies. He brushed off the fact that she claimed she didn't know he was married. He justified it, as if her deception didn't matter, as if protecting her mattered more than protecting the memory of his own family. To hear his words is to feel the unease of something deeper than infidelity. It is to witness a man still entangled, still clinging, still under what can only be described as a spell. But how does a man, an ordinary man, become so consumed that reason, morality, and even love for his children are eclipsed? How does a forbidden romance grow into a force strong enough to make him betray everything he once held dear? Tonight, we step into that question. We step into the darkness of obsession, manipulation, and the haunting psychology of a man who still longed for the very voice that helped lead him to ruin. Before the world knew his name, Chris Watts lived what looked like a quiet, ordinary life. A modest home in Frederick, Colorado. A wife, Shanann, who poured her energy into building a future for her family. 2 little girls who filled the house with laughter and chaos. On the surface, it was the picture of suburban stability. But beneath that image, Chris was drifting. He was the kind of man who never spoke loudly, who rarely drew attention to himself. Yet, inside, there was a restlessness he could not name. Shanann, strong-willed and ambitious, planned everything down to the smallest detail. Chris, quiet and passive, often followed her lead. To neighbors, they looked balanced. To him, sometimes, it felt like a cage. It was during this quiet discontent that Nichol entered. A coworker who became more than a friend, more than a distraction. She was freedom in human form. She asked about his thoughts, his dreams, what he wanted out of life. Questions Shannon had already mapped out answers to years ago. With Nichol, he could imagine a different future, one that wasn't about responsibility but about escape. The affair did not explode into his life overnight. It seeped in slowly, like water under a locked door. Texts, late-night calls, stolen moments. With every secret, the double life grew stronger, and the walls of his old life grew weaker. By the time summer came, Chris was no longer just a husband and father. He was two men, one living the life his wife had built, and another, living in the fantasy Nichol whispered into his ear. That fantasy would become the spell he could not shake, even after everything collapsed. To understand the depth of Chris's fall, we have to understand the power of the woman who pulled him in. Nichol was not just another face in his daily routine, she was the opening in the wall he felt trapped behind. She offered something Shannon, with her structure and discipline, could not, the illusion of freedom. With Nichol, there were no schedules, no constant reminders of responsibility. Instead, there was laughter, spontaneity, and a kind of attention Chris had long convinced himself he wasn't receiving at home. She asked him questions that made him feel alive again. She leaned in, listened closely, and with every passing day, made him believe he was more than just the quiet man standing in his wife's shadow. It was intoxicating. Forbidden love always is. Each secret message carried a rush of adrenaline. Each stolen moment made him believe he was slipping into a life where nothing could restrain him. She wasn't just a woman, she became an idea. The idea of a different life. The idea of escape. But the lure was not innocent. When she questioned him, she chipped away at his marriage. When she demanded honesty, she wrapped herself tighter around his secrets. And when she pressed for a future together, she made him believe the only way forward was to burn down everything behind him. By the time he realized how far he'd gone, it no longer felt like a choice. The fantasy had become stronger than reality. And Chris, the man who once blended into the background, was now standing in the middle of a dangerous spell he could not see clearly enough to break. The prison call revealed more than longing. It exposed the way Chris's mind had been reshaped by the relationship. When the topic of Nichol's lies came up, her claim that she didn't know he was married, Chris didn't condemn her. He didn't show anger. Instead, he made excuses for her. Think about that. A man who lost his wife, his children, his freedom. Still bending words to protect the woman who stood at the center of it all. He brushed off her deception as though it was nothing. Almost as if admitting the truth about her would collapse the fantasy he still held on to. This wasn't love in its purest form. This was attachment built on manipulation. A slow conditioning where lies became acceptable, and secrecy became normal. Each time she bent reality, he followed. Each time she asked for more, he gave it. And in the end, he could no longer separate her truth from his own. It was the classic pattern of psychological entrapment. The victim begins to defend the manipulator. They excuse behavior that would once seem unthinkable. They start to rewrite the story so that the illusion survives, no matter the cost. Chris wasn't literally under magic. But his choices, his justifications, his desperate wish to still hear her voice, it all mirrored the power of a spell. A spell of the mind. A spell of obsession. One that lingered even after his entire life had turned to ashes. The phone line hums, then his voice cuts through. Calm. Almost tender. I just wish I could talk to her, just once. It is a haunting statement. Not a plea for forgiveness from Shannon's family. Not a reflection on the lives he ended. But a longing for the woman whose presence fueled the unraveling of his world. In that moment, Chris sounded less like a man in prison and more like a man still waiting for a call that would never come. His words revealed a truth many found hard to swallow, even after the crime, after the trial, after the silence of his cell, the attachment had not died. He was still tethered to her. Every excuse he made for her in that call reinforced the spell. He justified her lies, softened the truth, protected her image. It wasn't about defending facts anymore, it was about keeping alive the fantasy that had once made him feel powerful, wanted, and free. To the outside world, it was madness. To him, it was comfort. A comfort that showed just how deep her influence ran. Even caged by concrete walls, Chris carried the weight of a bond that blurred the line between love and obsession. A bond that had become his prison long before the state locked the cell behind him. Psychologists have a name for this kind of grip. It is called a trauma bond, an attachment that forms when intimacy, secrecy, and emotional highs are laced with lies, fear, or betrayal. It does not feel like abuse in the moment. It feels addictive. The brain floods with dopamine during the thrill of secrecy, then crashes in guilt and shame. That cycle creates a loop, one that chains the victim tighter every time they return. Chris's words on that prison call are a textbook example. By excusing Nichol's lies, he was reinforcing the cycle. The lie created tension. His defense of her released it. That small relief became its own reward, tricking his mind into protecting the very thing that was destroying him. To outsiders, it looks like blindness. To the person trapped, it feels like survival. Breaking free from such a bond requires distance, perspective, and sometimes years of recovery. But Chris never had that chance. By the time his obsession was fully exposed, his world had already collapsed. Experts describe it as a spell without magic. A spell woven through human weakness, emotional hunger, and carefully placed words. Once inside, reason bends. Logic fades. The person will sacrifice reputation, family, even freedom, just to keep the illusion alive. That is why his prison call felt so chilling. Not because of what he said, but because of what it revealed. A man still enchanted by the very force that led him to annihilation. A man whose chains were not only iron and steel, but invisible threads that reached from a woman who had already walked away. When the dust settled, there were no winners, only devastation. Shanann and her children were gone. Chris was condemned to spend the rest of his life behind bars. And Nichol? She slipped out of the spotlight, leaving Chris alone with the ruin he created. Yet even in the silence of prison, the spell lingered. He spoke of her with a softness that startled those listening. He wished for her voice, her presence, her reassurance. It was as though the destruction of his family hadn't severed the bond, it had sealed it. The irony was brutal. The woman who had once promised escape had already moved on, but Chris remained shackled to her memory. Alone in his cell, he carried the fantasy like a relic, clinging to the idea of a love that never truly existed. And what makes it more haunting is that he wasn't chasing reality. He was chasing the version of himself he thought he had found in her presence, the man who was wanted, admired, unburdened. Without her, he was nothing more than a father, a husband, and finally, a prisoner. With her, he imagined he was free. But freedom built on lies can only collapse. And when it did, the fallout was more than just the crime itself. It was a portrait of a man consumed, destroyed not only by what he did, but by the obsession that refused to let him go. In the end, Chris Watts was left with nothing but echoes, echoes of a woman's voice that no longer answered, echoes of a family he destroyed, echoes of a fantasy that dissolved into the cold steel of a prison cell. When he said, "I just wish I could talk to her," it was more than longing. It was the proof of a man still caught in the web of his own making. A man who could not see clearly, even after everything had crumbled. Was it love? Was it manipulation? Or was it something darker, the kind of obsession that feels like a spell, binding a man's heart and mind until he no longer recognizes himself? Perhaps we will never know the full extent of Nichol's influence, or the depths of Chris's weakness. What we do know is this: obsession has the power to bend reality, to make lies feel like truth, and to make destruction look like destiny. And so, as the prison doors remain locked, one question lingers like a shadow across his story: did Chris whatever truly escape her grip, or is he still, even now, under her spell?